Welcome to declaring member variables. In the last session, I walked us through class declaration. So class declaration, we already covered that, where we have your class keyword, the name of the class, the opening braces, the body of the class, and the closing braces. With declaring member variables, we start with from a point of knowledge. For now, we've already looked at some fields. So with that, I'll have us know that a field is a type of member variable. So there are other member variables, and let's start looking at them, trickling down from what we already know, which is fields. So the field examples we have is in the database class. We have the string username, which has been initiated to nothing, or rather a blank string, an empty string, and string password, which has been initiated to another empty string. I'll just go to the IDE to show us that so we can follow. Here we go. If you missed the previous session, there's the code available there's a link available to this code after that session. I'll also attach a card to the session in this video, but it should be the session that is directly before or after this one in the playlists Java Essentials. So we have string by the name declare. That's a session is by the name declaring class or something similar. So this is an example of the fields. This one's here. It is one of the member variables. That is fields. And we have local variables. Local variables are those which are defined within the method. For example, string example 1, string is equals to new connection string. String example 2 is equals to example string, and so on and so forth. So they are in the method, within the method curly braces, i.e. within that block of code or in the method. Those are local variables. Then we have parameters. Parameters are variables declared in the method declaration. We'll talk about methods in the next session. So they look like this. It's what you pass in between the parentheses. For example, we have this one right here in the method connect. Those ones right there. So that is that from the type of member variables, starting from the field, which you already covered, then the local variables, then the parameters. Now, the member variable components are 1, the modifier, which is an access modifier, either public or private. This is optional. We have the type, which is a data type, and we have the name of the variable. Same to this, the type and the name. So more on that. So we start with the modifier. So again, the modifier is optional. We call them access modifiers. They are used to control access to our field. Let me just switch to this. So we will discuss more about this later, but for now, let's look at what public means. Public means it is accessible from all classes. I'll demonstrate that in a few. Private means it is accessible only within its class directly. Now, we make fields private to encapsulate them. Encapsulation is a concept, an object-oriented programming concept. It's an object-oriented programming concept that helps us restrict direct access to class members. So I'm going to demonstrate this. Walk with me back to our code. Again, if you missed the first session, you should get this code, the finished code from that session, and from GitHub. There's a link available in the declaring class discussion. So I'm in the database class, and I want to demonstrate encapsulation. Right now, we are working with these fields: connection string, username, and password. Into my main Java class in the previous session, we had created some objects. And here we go. I detained one, the Oracle object, to keep it simple, and I invoked the method print status. Also, this is an edited bit from the previous session. To keep it simple, I just used one. So I'll go to print status to show us what the method does. What the method does is it sends to our output the connection string, the username, and the password. So what I would expect to see in my output is the connection string, the username, and the password. Now, if I run this, I will see the connection string, which is null, the username, which is null, and the password, which I changed to password access. So here we go. Password access is the current password for the field. Now, if I wanted to access this field, I can access it like this inside my main method. So I'm going via the Oracle object and I am accessing the field password. A field cannot stay like that, open-ended. I need to put it, say, inside a print statement. So I'll type in sout, then I will move that Oracle password field access inside it and print, just to see what will come as the result. There we go, password accessed. Now, I will make this public, that is package, it's currently packaged private. We'll talk more about access modifiers later. So even if I name it public, as per our example, it should still give me the same results. Public means it could be accessed from any other class. And right now we're in the main class. And as you can see, I can access the Oracle the password in database by the name, by the contents password accessed. So encapsulation then, what does it mean? It means we need to make it private so we can only access it within the class. And if I make that change right now, you'll already see one related problem. This one related problem will let me know that I can no longer access it directly as I did before from the main.java class. So when you do that, then you can only have access to it indirectly. What does that mean? What that means is you work with getters and setters for that method. Now, getters and setters you can generate. What you need to do is select the private field, right-click on it, select generate, then select getter and setter. So I will select the private one. As you see, that's the one that is with a locked red mark there. Then I'll select the password string and then I'll click on OK. There I'll have my getter, which will be returning my password, and my setter, which will be setting my password. We'll talk more about methods in the next session to make sense of this, of the return statements and such. So if I would wish to access it, then if I would wish to access the password, I'll need to access get password method, which is a public method. So I'll come back here. Instead of accessing password, I can access get password as such. If I run that, I see password accessed. So I am accessing it, but indirectly. Now, next, if I work with the setter, I can do something like Oracle get password, and then I'll need to pass in the password here, ABCD, and such. So we'll talk about this later. I need to move this. So I expect to see some changes. We're seeing there ABCD. Okay, so we'll talk more about why at some point, why the password here is password accessed, but here it's ABCD in the setter, and so on and so forth. So there we go. And that's that. So I'll just, let's remain with the, to avoid confusion, let's just remain with the getter at this point, or rather to keep it clean, short and sweet. Okay. So that is that on encapsulation. You make your fields private. Which field did we make private? We made the field password here. private. Why? Because we wanted it to be accessible directly from within the class only, but if you're accessing it outside of the class, we access it indirectly. That's a very good coding practice, and we'll get to practice some more with that the more you code in Java. Going back to our class discussion, so still on member variables, we've seen the public and the private getters and setter. Public and the private modifiers. So next we have the type. Now we have primitive data types, int, boolean, among others. We'll talk about them later. I tried to structure this in a way where we can start with OOP concepts if you're coming from a programming background where you're not dealing with Java, so you already know some concepts like the data types. But later on we'll cover them, just in case there's somebody in the house who's listening and they are yet to know about data types. So we have int, boolean, among others. Then with the reference types, we have string, object, and probably among others. So we'll talk more about them later. This is obviously required in Java. If you would wish to, although there's, if you're coming from the likes of Kotlin and such, some of them, sometimes they are inferred. Even Python, they are inferred. But in Java, this is required. You need to state the type before the username, the name of the variable. So you start with the type. If it was an int type, for example, you type in, let me just type it at the side. Hope I won't confuse you. Follow with me. Int, say year. And then you set it to say 2025, like that. Okay, so there are some rules to this. We'll talk more about this, which is why you're seeing with strings we have, the double quotation marks, but with int we don't. More on that data type discussion coming up. But for now, just know that it is part of the data type. Member variables components, part of the declaration. Oops. Okay. Then we have the name. Of course, it's required. I mean, what are we using here? So this is required. So we have, when you're setting this, make sure that you can self-document your code. What does self-documenting mean? If you missed the previous session, self-documenting meaning work with the names that make sense. So you won't need to have comments everywhere. So for example, if it's a username, then call it as such. The type and the name should be username, okay? This is acceptable. Instead of using a comment, this is a username, and then using the name X, because X could mean anything. And if somebody is coming in to read your code, they wouldn't know what X is unless you include that comment. So to avoid such a case where we are using comments unnecessarily, let's work with self-documentation of our code. Then the convention is to use lower camel case. For example, you start with lower case for the name of the variable, but then if there is more than one word, you can work with a capitalization of the first letter of that word. So this is lower camel case. That is the naming convention of our variables. So to summarize, we have these member variables, we have fields, we have local variables, and we have parameters. And they have these components, the modifier, the type, and the name. See you on the next one.